People should know what's going on one regard, and they should know what the heck is happening, and one shouldn't be afraid to also share, the worldview that one has. That's how I feel at the end of the day.
I agree with that, but it's always delicate, and it's always you have to also be concerned about that other person too. You can't just not everybody's willing and ready to learn, and not only for that other person, but for yourself. If you try to push these ideas on some people, you will get, unfortunately, you'll get a very hostile resistance.
Yes.
And
yes.
It's not something that we should be afraid of or be timid about.
Exactly.
But it is a reality, and we kind of have to deal with that. I don't know what the best approach is. I don't know if going around screaming to every stranger that you can get their ear.
Right.
That these things are the case. It's sort of a personal decision whether you approach somebody or not about these things.
Yes.
Because you do have to mind other things about your own life and your own security and whatnot.
Of course.
Because you will be treated as a crazy person if the person you're talking to views you as such. So you have to tread lightly, unfortunately.
Exactly. Well, that's true, and I guess the approach of also what you've done, so to speak, you're setting up a website, you're publishing your articles, you're writing about it, you're processing the information, you're sharing your perspective in maybe a few other articles then, and a consequence of that, of course, is that when people are ready for themselves, when they get their eyes open or they just want to find out more, then your material is there, and people can proceed from there, so to speak.
Yeah, that's kind of what you hope with a website. It's very passive in that sense. You can kind of come and go as you please, and you can't really force a website onto somebody.
Yeah.
So it does do that. But again, a lot of the times you end up sort of preaching to the choir too, because you won't reach the average person.
Yes.
With a website like mine or whatnot. So you are very limited at times of who you can speak to or who you can communicate with a website and with sort of your day-to-day life and the different people that you run into. You don't have to share everything that you know. You don't have to give this person a whole new world view that you've met or that you know.
Right.
You can point out little things that if they're willing to learn, they'll grasp at things that challenge their worldview in a sense, but not be a polar opposite. You can do little things like stay on the War of Terror theme. You can say, well, checkpoints and stuff that they have now where they're checking cars for this and that, or at airports and whatnot. You can point out something simple like the Soviet system and how they used to do these things and why people, or why it was so horrible with the Soviet system.
Yes.
And try to draw parallels to things that they've already accepted as bad or accepted as evil. And you can sort of approach things differently and then sort of walk them through the information. You don't have to sort of overload that person with a very strongly different worldview.
Yes. This is very philosophical of a nature. The discussion we're having, nothing wrong with that. I want to squeeze in one more of these kind of questions before we move on to the meat, so to speak, and get into a little bit more of some of the article series you've written. But one thing I want to ask you again, because I think it's an important point and interesting hearing your perspective on it, and that is, do you think it's also potentially a wrong, how should I phrase it? It's the outlook that we might have, that are interested in information like this, is that, okay, great, now let's awaken the entire world here and tell everybody about it in one sense. But could it be that the information also isn't for everyone in that regard? People potentially aren't ready for it, and there actually never is going to be a huge awakening. This is for a small elect few. Do you think that's a possibility at this stage?
That's question. It is at times. It certainly feels like that, where the idea of awakening everybody or creating some sort of mass movement is futile, and it probably is, quite honestly. When you look at the things that we're up against, I mean, you can look at the propaganda machines and whatnot, and the subliminals and the advertisement. And this entire system is so enormous and so well thought out. If we think we can come along with a couple of websites and whatnot and dismantle this system, I think is probably kind of naive.
Mm.
And maybe that's a little on the depressing side, that people like to think that they can just kind of come along and we'll have a nice little revolution and everything will change. But it's not quite that simple. And I kind of lost my train of thought.
No problem. I follow what you mean. I hear what you're saying, so to speak, and it's I feel that it's that idea that you're talking about the mass awakening, so to speak, and I agree with you there, because it feels like it's a bit. Then it's going to be another popularity stunt, and to some extent, certain esoteric information already, is becoming mass popular. We can even look at the Da Vinci Code or what have you, in order to just see what potentially happens. It gets inflated and put into the mainstream, and nothing really kind of happens with it, so to speak. I feel that the information and the so-called awakening process is more, as we talked about at the beginning, more individual, and it's more delicate and personal than that, meaning that it's probably never going to be a mass thing you can sell to the mass, so to speak. It's going to be highly fine-tuned to each individual. That's how I feel at this point, at least. We'll see what happens here in the years to come. But
I agree with you on that, where it is an individual thing. When the further down the rabbit hole, or whatever you want to call it, you go, it becomes more and more personal.
Yes.
And you start to learn things that you just can't really share with other people. And that's not a bad thing at all. Some of the more profound things you experience in life are on an individual level, and you can't
Yes.
share it with people.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And if you did come out with something that appealed to the masses, if you want to call it that, to most people, would you have to drain so much of the detail and so much of the life out of the idea that it becomes just another propaganda stunt?
Yes.
And does it lose everything that it means in that process? Is an important question.
Very important. So, I mean, where do you think we are heading? Do you think that we're going to get into some of the plans here later on, of course, but do you think that we're on that track now, and things are going well for the powers that be, and the think tanks, and these people that we're talking about, the control freaks of the world? Are they achieving their goals, do you think, or are we looking at a world where a few parameters, so to speak, have come into the picture which has upset it a little bit? What do you think?
I don't think I have too optimistic an outlook when it comes to that. I think they're pretty much chugging along at the pace they want, and they're kind of dictating things as they go. Is it possible for us to sort of upset the system? I think it is possible. Because a lot of these different things are very interconnected. A lot of these different ideas, like sort of a push towards a world government and using global warming and these different things to promote that and to achieve that. If you upset one of these ideas or one of these things, it could get things out of sync and kind of mess things up a bit for them. Could that be turned into something that snowballs a little? I don't know. I don't think I'm quite that optimistic, but we don't have a lot of choice in the matter. I mean, if we sit back and do nothing, well, they'll get exactly what they want. If we try to resist, well, there's this slight hope, and that's
yes.
all we can really ask for at this point.
I agree. Very good point. Let's see here. We have about 10 minutes left here in our first segment. Why don't we dive into it a little bit so we can give a taste of what we're going to go into a little bit later as well. I mean, I noticed that you focus a lot on Bertrand Russell. You have a whole series called The Scientific Outlook. That's, of course, that examines his book by the same name. Why do you think it's important to look at a guy like Bertrand Russell today?
Part of the advantage of going back a bit and looking at some of these older books, like the Scientific Outlook, it was published in 1930, and why it's important to go back and look at that. Same reason any history is important, I suppose, but gives you a perspective on where you've been and where you're going. But someone like Bertrand Russell, and there wasn't any particular reason why I chose Bertrand Russell. There's nothing really special about him. There's a whole host of other people books I could have used, but it's the fact that when he talks about creating a scientific society, you can look back at 80 years ago, and the things that he's saying this society needs to become, and this society is going to become, and that they're working towards, have come to fruition, a lot of it. If you talk about different ideas that are today, you can talk about different technologies that are coming, and RFID chips and brain chips and different things, and people can find that a little too far-fetched. But when you go back a little bit, and then you can show these guys and these different characters saying, the future is going to be like this. And then when we're living it, you can look around and see it actually happening, or it's actually here.
Yes.
And that's a big advantage of being to show people that they have been working towards these different things and they have accomplished them. And some of the things they've mentioned they may not have fully accomplished, but you can see over a 50, 100-year span how these things have become within reach. And that's sort of the reason for going back a fair bit in time for getting some of these different authors.
Yes. You're talking about the scientific society, some of his ideas, Bertrand Russell's ideas on how to manage society, how science and technology are going to help to shape his picture of the world. When you're reading his material and looking into what he's been studying and so forth and what he has proposed, I guess, is it clear of what the interface, so to speak, is between his ideas and how they have become implemented in society? I mean, are there agencies that you discovered that actually have picked up on his ideas and also mentioned that they did this in the process?
An obvious one that stands out from my website is the Club of Rome. That is a think tank, and they've promoted certain ideas, and they're filled with influential people. And a lot of what Bertrand Russell talks about his scientific society, a big part of that is this idea of an organic society. And that's based on the idea that everything's very interconnected and interdependent, and all these different buzzwords that they have, and that an organic society is the society itself is organic, or it's living, and that different parts of that society would represent a liver or a heart or whatever, and that the society as a whole has more value than its individual parts. And that's kind of what an organic society is, or an interdependent society. So you would have, on a world scale,